The traffic light turned red at the corner of 5th and Main, and I pressed my foot against the brake pedal of my Mercedes. It was a Tuesday evening in October, the kind of crisp autumn day where the sun sets early and the shadows grow long across downtown streets. I was on my way to a charity gala, dressed in my best evening gown, my hair perfectly styled, my makeup flawless. I was Margaret Chen, former Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist, now enjoying a quieter life of philanthropy and community involvement. I had earned my peace after 30 years of chasing corruption and exposing powerful people who thought they were above the law. But peace, I would soon learn, is a fragile thing. As I waited for the light to change, my eyes drifted to the sidewalk on my right. A homeless woman sat on the cold concrete, her back against a brick building, holding a small child bundled in dirty blankets. The woman's hair was matted and unwashed, her clothes torn and stained, her face hidden beneath layers of grime and exhaustion. I had seen hundreds of homeless people in my years living in this city, and I had donated to shelters, volunteered at soup kitchens, written articles about the affordable housing crisis. But this woman was different. Something about the way she held that child made me look closer. Something about the curve of her shoulders, the shape of her hands, the way she rocked the baby with a gentle, rhythmic motion that seemed hauntingly familiar. I squinted through my windshield, my heart beginning to beat faster for reasons I couldn't yet explain. And then she lifted her head. The breath left my lungs in a single, devastating rush. Even through the dirt, even through the hollow cheeks and the sunken eyes and the physical deterioration that comes from months of malnutrition, I knew that face. I had kissed that face goodnight for 18 years. I had watched that face graduate from high school, then college. I had watched that face smile as she walked down the aisle 3 years ago in a wedding dress that cost more than my car. That was my daughter, Emma. And she was supposed to be in Europe. She was supposed to be living in luxury with her wealthy husband, Richard, traveling the world and attending charity galas just like the one I was headed to. She was supposed to be happy, successful, living the dream life that every mother wants for her child. But instead, she was sitting on a downtown sidewalk, homeless, holding a child I didn't even know existed. I didn't remember parking my car. I didn't remember running across 4 lanes of traffic, ignoring the horns and the screaming drivers and the very real possibility that I could be killed. All I knew was that I needed to reach her. I needed to understand. I needed to know how my daughter, my beautiful, brilliant Emma, had ended up here. Emma, I whispered, dropping to my knees in front of her. The concrete was cold through my expensive gown, but I didn't care. Emma, baby, it's me. It's Mom. She didn't recognize me at first. Her eyes, once bright with intelligence and humor, were now dull and distant, the eyes of someone who had seen too much and survived too little. She pulled the child closer to her chest, a protective instinct that broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. Please, she whispered, her voice cracked and raw. I don't have any money. Please just leave us alone. Emma, it's Mom. It's Margaret. Sweetheart, look at me. Really look at me. And then her eyes focused. I watched the recognition dawn slowly, like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. Tears began streaming down her dirty cheeks, leaving clean trails through the grime. Mom! The word was barely audible. Mom, you can't be here. He'll find out. He'll know. You need to leave. You need to go right now. I'm not leaving you, I said firmly, reaching for her arm. That's when I saw them. The bruises, purple and yellow and green, covering her forearms like a grotesque painting. And something else. Small puncture marks on the inside of her elbow that made my journalist instincts scream with alarm. Emma, what happened to you? Where is Richard? Why are you here? Whose child is this? She looked down at the baby in her arms, and for a moment, her face softened with a love so pure it made everything else disappear. This is Lily, she whispered. She's mine. Well, she is now. But Mom, you don't understand. You can't be here. If Richard finds out I talk to you, he'll kill me. He'll actually kill me this time. This time. Those 2 words hung in the air like poison gas. I made a decision in that moment, the kind of decision that changes everything. I grabbed Emma's arm, gently but firmly, and I said, "You're coming with me. Right now. Both of you." She tried to protest. She tried to pull away. But 3 years of homelessness had left her weak, and I was fueled by a mother's rage and terror. I practically carried her to my car, the baby still clutched to her chest, and I drove. I didn't go to the charity gala. I went to the nearest hotel, a nice one where I knew they wouldn't ask questions if I paid cash. I got us a suite, 2 bedrooms and a living area, and I locked the door behind us. Only then did I let myself really look at what had become of my daughter. Emma had always been beautiful. Even as a child, she had the kind of luminous quality that made people stop and stare. By the time she was in college, she could have been a model if she'd wanted to, but she was too smart for that, too ambitious. She graduated top of her class with a degree in international relations, spoke 3 languages fluently, and had job offers from think tanks and nonprofits around the world. And then she met Richard Whitmore at a conference in New York, and everything changed. Richard came from old money, the kind of family that had been wealthy for so many generations they didn't even talk about it anymore. His family ran what they called a private adoption consultancy, helping wealthy families navigate the complex world of international adoption. Richard himself was charming, educated, handsome in that understated way that comes from good genes and better skincare. He pursued Emma relentlessly, and she fell hard. I had concerns from the beginning. Something about Richard felt off to me, but I couldn't put my finger on it. He was always polite, always appropriate, but there was a coldness behind his eyes that made me uneasy. I told myself I was being paranoid, being an overprotective mother who couldn't let go. When they got engaged after just 6 months of dating, I smiled and planned the wedding and told myself that my daughter knew what she was doing. The wedding was spectacular. 300 guests at an estate in Connecticut, a dress that cost $40,000, a honeymoon in Bali. And then Emma moved into Richard's family estate, and slowly, gradually, she started disappearing from my life. First, it was small things. Phone calls that went to voicemail, text messages that took days to be returned. When we did talk, Emma seemed distant, distracted. She said Richard's family valued privacy, that they didn't like their business being discussed with outsiders. I tried to explain that I wasn't an outsider. I was her mother. But Emma just sighed and said I didn't understand how wealthy families operated. Then the visits stopped. Emma said they were traveling too much, doing charity work in Monaco and Paris and Dubai. She sent photos occasionally, always perfectly composed shots of her at galas or museums or fancy restaurants. But something about those photos felt staged to me, artificial. I tried to visit, but the estate had heavy security and I was turned away at the gate. I tried to call Richard directly, but his assistant always said he was in meetings. 6 months ago, Emma called me one last time. Her voice was flat, emotionless. She said that she and Richard had decided they needed space from my toxic influence. She said I had always been controlling and manipulative, that I had never approved of Richard, that she was happier without me in her life. She said not to contact her again. And then she hung up. I was devastated. I called her back 100 times, but her number had been disconnected. I drove to the estate, but the guards had orders not to let me through. I hired a private investigator, but he came back with nothing useful. Emma had simply vanished into her new life, and there was nothing I could do about it. Until tonight. Until I found her on that sidewalk with a child in her arms and bruises on her skin and terror in her eyes. Now, in the hotel room, I helped Emma into the shower while I held Lily. The baby was maybe 2 years old, with dark curly hair and the most beautiful eyes I'd ever seen. She was surprisingly calm, looking up at me with curious intelligence. When I examined her more closely, I noticed she had a cleft palate, a correctable birth defect that should have been treated surgically in infancy. Emma emerged from the bathroom 40 minutes later, wrapped in a hotel robe, her hair clean for the first time in who knows how long. She looked more like herself, but also heartbreakingly different. She had lost at least 30 pounds. Her skin was sallow and scarred. She moved like someone who expected to be hit at any moment. I had ordered room service, an obscene amount of food, and I watched as Emma ate like she was starving, which she probably was. Lily sat in her lap, and Emma fed her carefully, making sure the baby ate before taking each bite herself. It was only after they had both eaten that Emma finally spoke. "Mom, I need to tell you everything. And you need to promise me that you'll believe me, because it's going to sound insane." I took her hand across the table. "Baby, I promise. Tell me everything." And so she did. Emma told me that the marriage had been wrong from the very beginning. As soon as they returned from their honeymoon, Richard had changed. The charm vanished, replaced by cold control. He took her phone, said it was being upgraded, and gave her a new one with monitoring software. He took her laptop, said it had a virus, and replaced it with one where he could see everything she did. He took her credit cards, said they were consolidating finances, and gave her a small allowance that he monitored obsessively. Then came the isolation. Richard moved them to a remote wing of the family estate, far from the main house where his business was conducted. He fired the household staff she liked and replaced them with people loyal only to him. He told her that his therapist had recommended reducing stress in her life, which meant cutting off contact with toxic people, which meant me, her brother David, her college friends, everyone she had ever loved. Emma said she tried to resist at first, but Richard was patient and methodical. Every time she pushed back, there were consequences. He would lock her in her room for days. He would withhold food. He would play mind games, telling her that I had died in a car accident, showing her a fabricated obituary, fake funeral photos that his family's money had created. He convinced her that I had blamed her for her father's death years ago, that I had never really loved her, that she was better off without me. And then Emma got pregnant. She didn't plan it. Richard had always been careful about birth control, obsessive even. But somehow it happened, and when Emma told him, she expected him to be happy. Instead, he looked at her with clinical detachment and said, "Good. We've been waiting for this." That's when Emma learned the truth about Richard's family business. They weren't just running an adoption consultancy. They were running a trafficking operation. For 15 years, the Whitmore family had been buying babies from desperate mothers, forging documents, and selling them to wealthy clients around the world for anywhere from $200,000 to $500,000 each. They had sold over 200 babies, made tens of millions of dollars, and never been caught because they owned judges, police chiefs, hospital administrators, and politicians in 6 states. And now Richard wanted Emma's baby. Emma was kept in medical isolation for her entire pregnancy. A nurse named Sarah attended to her, monitored her health, made sure she ate well and stayed healthy. Emma thought it was excessive, but she was so isolated and so gaslight that she didn't trust her own judgment anymore. When she finally went into labor, it was in a private room in the estate with no hospital records, no birth certificate, nothing official. Sarah delivered the baby, a healthy girl, and Emma held her daughter for exactly 3 minutes. She named her Sophia, and then Richard took Sophia away. Emma said she screamed until her voice gave out. She fought, but Richard had 2 security guards hold her down while he walked out of the room with her baby. Sarah gave her a sedative, and when Emma woke up 12 hours later, there was a different baby in the bassinet next to her bed. This baby had a cleft palate, a visible birth defect. Richard stood in the doorway and said, "Your daughter was defective. We gave you a replacement. Be grateful." But the baby wasn't defective. The baby was Lily, a child who had been born to a different mother, a child who had been rejected by Richard's clients because of her correctable birth defect. Richard planned to dispose of Lily, his clinical term for murder, because babies with defects couldn't be sold and therefore had no value. Emma asked about Sophia every day for months. Richard told her that Sophia had been sold to a wealthy family in Dubai, that she was gone forever, that Emma needed to accept it and move on. He said if Emma ever told anyone about what happened, he would have her committed to a psychiatric facility, and no one would ever believe her anyway because he had spent years building a paper trail of her supposed mental illness. But Emma couldn't move on. She bonded with Lily despite Richard's orders not to get attached. She started planning her escape, knowing that if she didn't get out soon, Richard would dispose of Lily and probably force Emma to get pregnant again for the next round of inventory. 6 months ago, Emma saw her chance. There was a small electrical fire in the estate kitchen, nothing serious, but enough to distract the security staff. Emma grabbed Lily and ran. She had no identification, no money, No phone. Richard had made sure she had nothing. But she ran anyway, into the night, into the unknown, because staying meant death for Lily and slavery for herself. She had been living on the streets ever since. She couldn't go to the police because Richard had reported her as mentally ill and dangerous, and he had fabricated evidence that she had kidnapped his child. She couldn't access money because Richard controlled all their accounts. She couldn't even prove who she was because Richard had taken her driver's license, her social security card, everything. She had tried to contact me a dozen times, but she didn't have my phone number memorized and she couldn't risk using a public computer because Richard had people watching for any activity under her name. So she survived day by day, protecting Lily, hoping that somehow, someday, she would find a way to expose Richard and get her real daughter back. By the time Emma finished telling me her story, we were both crying. I held her and Lily, and I made her a promise. I promised her that I would destroy Richard Whitmore. I promised her that I would expose his family's trafficking operation. I promised her that we would get Sophia back. And I promised her that Richard would pay for every single thing he had done to her. But first, I needed help. And I knew exactly who to call. My son David is an attorney, one of the best in the state. He specializes in family law, and he has a reputation for taking on powerful people and winning. I called him at 11 o'clock that night, woke him up from a dead sleep and said, "I need you at the Hilton downtown right now. Emma's alive and we're going to need a lawyer." David arrived within 30 minutes, still in his pajamas with a coat thrown over them. When he saw Emma, he broke down. He had believed, like everyone else, that she had simply cut us off by choice. Seeing her like this, hearing her story, it changed something fundamental in him. He looked at me and said, "Whatever it takes, Mom. We destroy him." But David also brought bad news. As an attorney, he knew how powerful the Whitmore family was. He knew they had connections everywhere. He knew that going through traditional legal channels would be slow, difficult, and probably unsuccessful. Richard had been building a case against Emma for 3 years, documenting her supposed mental illness, creating a narrative that she was delusional and dangerous. If we went to the police, they would likely arrest Emma and return Lily to Richard. We needed a different approach. We needed evidence so overwhelming, so public, and so undeniable that even the Whitmore family's connections couldn't suppress it. We needed to expose Richard in a way that would make it impossible for him to hide. I spent the next 3 days calling in every favor I had accumulated during my 30-year journalism career. I reached out to Marcus, a former FBI agent who specialized in cybercrimes and owed me his life after I exposed the people who had kidnapped his daughter. I reached out to Yolanda, a former CPS caseworker who had tried to investigate the Whitmore family 10 years ago and had been threatened into silence. I reached out to Father Tom, a Catholic priest who served as a hospital chaplain and who had heard confessions from Whitmore employees that he couldn't legally share but could guide us toward. I reached out to Jade, my former protege, who was now a senior investigative journalist at a major newspaper. Each of them said yes immediately. Each of them had been waiting for someone to take down the Whitmore family. Each of them brought skills and resources that we desperately needed. Marcus hacked into the Whitmore family's servers and found exactly what Emma had described. An encrypted database labeled Inventory, with records of 47 babies sold over the past 5 years. Names, birth dates, prices, buyer information, everything. He also found current inventory, 3 babies being held at the estate right now, waiting for buyers. Yolanda connected us with 6 other mothers who had lost children to the Whitmore operation. Women who had been told their babies died during delivery, or were born with defects and needed to be institutionalized, or were taken by CPS for fabricated reasons. Women who had spent years grieving children who were actually alive and sold to wealthy families. Father Tom couldn't tell us what he knew, but he could tell us where to look. He identified Sarah, the nurse who had delivered Emma's baby and dozens of others, as someone whose conscience was eating her alive. Yolanda approached Sarah with an unofficial immunity deal, and Sarah broke down. She agreed to wear a wire to get video evidence, to testify to everything she had seen. Jade began writing the exposé that would bring everything into the light. She fact-checked every detail, verified every source, built a case so airtight that no editor could refuse to publish it and no lawyer could claim it was libel. And David filed emergency motions and legal documents that would keep Richard's lawyers busy and distracted while we prepared our trap. The plan was complex but necessary. We couldn't just go to the police because the police were compromised. We couldn't just publish the story because the Whitmore family would sue and suppress it before it could spread. We needed to create a moment of exposure so public, so dramatic, and so undeniable that the truth would spread faster than the Whitmore family could contain it. Richard had scheduled a charity gala at the estate for Saturday night. It was his annual fundraiser for his adoption consultancy, attended by wealthy clients, local politicians, and media representatives. It was the perfect opportunity to expose him in front of everyone who supported him. But we needed to do more than just expose him at the gala. We needed to rescue the 3 babies currently being held at the estate. We needed to get video evidence of the trafficking operation. And we needed to do it all without getting caught before we could go public. The night before the operation, I sat with Emma in our hotel room. Lily was asleep on the bed, peaceful and unaware of the storm that was about to break. Emma looked at me with eyes that were finally starting to show hope instead of just terror. "Mom, what if this doesn't work? What if Richard wins?" I took her hand. "Then we fail loudly, and someone else will finish what we started." "But Emma, I don't plan on failing. I plan on destroying the man who hurt my daughter." The gala was scheduled to start at 7 in the evening. Our operation would begin at 8, when the party was in full swing and security would be distracted by the crowd. Marcus would disable the security systems remotely. Sarah would lead me to the nursery where the babies were being held. Jade would be at the gala as press, ready to stream everything live to the world. David would file an emergency custody motion at exactly 8:15, triggering alarms that would pull Richard's lawyers away from the estate. At 7:30, Jade and I arrived at the Whitmore estate. I was dressed as her photographer, carrying a bag full of camera equipment and hidden recording devices. The estate was even more impressive than I had imagined. A sprawling mansion that looked like it belonged in a European fairy tale. Wealthy guests in expensive clothes mingled on the lawn, drinking champagne and talking about their latest vacations and their beautiful adopted children. I wondered how many of those children had been trafficked. I wondered how many of those parents knew the truth. I wondered how many of them would have cared even if they did know. Richard was holding court near the main house, charming and sophisticated in a perfectly tailored suit. I watched him from a distance. This man who had tortured my daughter, sold her baby, and built a criminal empire on the suffering of desperate mothers. He looked so normal, so successful, so utterly convinced of his own invincibility. That was about to change. At 8 o'clock exactly, Marcus sent the signal. The security systems went offline, just for 90 seconds, just long enough. Sarah met me at a service entrance and led me through a maze of hallways to a wing of the house I had never seen. The nursery was at the end of a long corridor, behind 2 locked doors. Sarah had the codes. We went inside. There were 3 babies, exactly as Marcus's hacking had revealed. 2 weeks old, 1 month old, 3 months old. All healthy, all sleeping peacefully in expensive cribs, completely unaware that they were being treated as merchandise. Sarah began gathering supplies, bottles and diapers and blankets, while I started documenting everything with my camera. Birth certificates with forged information, medical records with fabricated data, client contracts with prices and delivery dates. And then I found the safe. It was hidden behind a painting on the wall, and Sarah whispered that Richard kept his most sensitive documents there. She didn't know the combination, but I had to try. Emma's birthday didn't work. Richard's birthday didn't work. Their wedding anniversary didn't work. And then, on impulse, I tried the birthday of Richard's mother, who had died 6 years ago. The safe opened. Inside was a handwritten ledger documenting every transaction. Dates, names, prices, locations. Polaroid photographs of Richard holding each baby with handwritten notes on the back about their features and selling points. Bank account numbers for offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. And a letter, yellowed with age, from Richard's father to Richard. The letter was instructions, a how-to guide for running the family business. It talked about babies as products, mothers as suppliers, and clients as the only people who mattered. It talked about the importance of controlling every aspect of the operation, from the pregnancy to the delivery to the sale. It talked about disposing of defective merchandise. And it ended with a line that made my blood run cold. Remember, son, emotion is weakness. Never forget that we are providing a service. What we do is not crime. It is commerce. I photographed everything. Every page of the ledger, every Polaroid, every document. I had just finished when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Security had noticed something was wrong. Sarah and I looked at each other and I made a decision. I activated the live stream on my camera and started broadcasting to the 40,000 people who were already watching Jade's feed from the gala. My name is Margaret Chen, I said to the camera. I'm an investigative journalist, and I'm currently inside the Whitmore family estate. Behind me are 3 babies who are being held as inventory in a human trafficking operation. Richard Whitmore has been buying and selling babies for 15 years, and I have proof. I showed the camera everything. The babies, the documents, the ledger, the photographs. I explained Emma's story, Sarah's testimony, the 6 other mothers who had lost children. I showed Richard's father's letter. And I said, "This ends tonight." Security burst through the door, but by then, it was too late. The video was live. 40,000 people were watching. Marcus had already sent copies to 50 news outlets, the FBI, state police, and every major social media platform. Within minutes, the video had been shared thousands of times. Within an hour, it would have millions of views. The security guards didn't know what to do. They couldn't stop the broadcast because it was already out there. They couldn't arrest me because the entire world was watching. All they could do was escort Sarah and me back to the main gala, where Richard was just learning that his entire operation had been exposed. I walked out onto the lawn carrying one of the babies, Sarah behind me with the other 2. The gala had descended into chaos. Guests were checking their phones, seeing the live stream, realizing what kind of event they were actually attending. Richard stood in the middle of the lawn, his face pale, his perfect composure finally shattered. "Hello, Richard," I said. "I believe you know my daughter Emma, the one you've been telling everyone is mentally ill and dangerous, the one whose baby you stole and sold, the one you tried to destroy." He tried to speak, but no words came out. Jade was filming everything. Other guests were filming on their phones. The moment was being captured from a dozen angles, uploaded to the internet in real time, spreading across the world faster than Richard could possibly control. Police arrived within minutes, but not local police. FBI agents, coordinating with state police, all of whom had received Marcus's evidence package. They arrested Richard right there on his lawn, in front of all his wealthy friends and powerful connections. They read him his rights while the world watched. And then Emma arrived. I had told her to wait at the hotel to stay safe, but she couldn't. She needed to see Richard's face when his world collapsed. She walked through the crowd of guests, holding Lily in her arms, and she stood in front of her husband. "This is Lily," she said, her voice carrying across the silent lawn. "You called her defective. You were going to kill her because no one would buy a baby with a cleft palate. But she's not defective, Richard. She's perfect. And she's alive because I saved her from you." Richard finally found his voice. "You're insane. You kidnapped my child. You need psychiatric help." "Lily isn't your child," Emma said calmly. "DNA tests prove it. She's one of the babies you bought to sell. And you're going to prison for the rest of your life." The FBI led Richard away in handcuffs. As he passed me, he looked into my eyes and said, "This isn't over. My family has reach. You've made powerful enemies." I smiled. "No, Richard. This is over. Your family's reach ends tonight." The aftermath was swift and devastating for the Whitmore family. Within 24 hours, the video had 30 million views. News networks played it on repeat. Social media exploded with outrage. The FBI arrested 12 more people connected to the operation, including 2 judges, a police chief, and a hospital administrator. 6 state senators issued statements distancing themselves from the Whitmore family. The adoption agency was raided and shut down. And Richard's uncle Victor, who ran the international side of the operation from Switzerland, was arrested by Interpol based on evidence in Richard's safe. The trial took 3 months. Richard's lawyers tried everything. They claimed Emma was delusional, that I was a biased journalist with a vendetta, that Sarah was a disgruntled employee. But the evidence was overwhelming. We had the ledger, the photographs, the financial records, the testimonies of 6 mothers, Sarah's video footage, DNA evidence proving the babies weren't related to the families who had purchased them, and Richard's own words recorded at the gala. The prosecution built their case methodically. They showed the jury the Polaroid photographs of Richard holding each baby, with prices written on the back in his own handwriting. They presented the ledger, which documented every transaction in meticulous detail, showing a pattern of criminal activity spanning 15 years. They brought in forensic accountants who traced $23 million through shell companies and offshore accounts, all leading back to Richard and his family. The mothers testified, one after another, each story more heartbreaking than the last. A woman from Guatemala who had been told her twins died at birth, only to discover years later through our investigation that they had been sold to a family in California for $400,000. A woman from Ohio who had been declared mentally unfit by a judge on the Whitmore payroll and had her newborn taken by CPS, then placed through the Whitmore agency. A woman from Arizona whose baby had been switched at birth in a hospital where the administrator was receiving monthly payments from Richard's family. Sarah testified for 3 days, describing in clinical detail the 47 deliveries she had attended at the estate. She explained how Richard would examine each baby immediately after birth, assessing their market value based on physical characteristics. Blonde hair and blue eyes commanded premium prices. Babies with any visible defects were deemed worthless. She described how Richard would forge birth certificates, creating fictional mothers and fathers, erasing the real parents from history. She described the disposal protocol for babies who couldn't be sold, a euphemism for murder that she had witnessed twice before she couldn't take it anymore and agreed to help us. Emma's testimony was the most powerful. She sat on the witness stand for 2 full days, describing her captivity, the systematic psychological torture, the forced pregnancy, and the moment when Richard took Sophia away. The defense tried to break her on cross-examination, suggesting she was mentally unstable, that her story was a delusion brought on by postpartum depression. But Emma was unshakable. She had the scars to prove the abuse. She had the DNA evidence proving Lily wasn't her biological child. And she had her own biological daughter Sophia, who had been located in Dubai and whose DNA matched Emma's perfectly. The jury deliberated for less than 2 days. When they returned to the courtroom, the foreman stood and read the verdict. Guilty on all 47 counts of human trafficking. Guilty on kidnapping. Guilty on fraud. Guilty on conspiracy. Guilty on money laundering. Guilty on every single charge. The judge, a woman in her 60s who had spent her career advocating for children's rights, delivered the sentence with barely contained rage. She looked directly at Richard and said, "You treated innocent babies as commodities. You destroyed families for profit. You corrupted institutions designed to protect the vulnerable. You represent the absolute worst of humanity, and I will ensure you never have the opportunity to harm another child again." She sentenced him to 47 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole, 1 year for each baby he had trafficked. She ordered full restitution of $23 million to be distributed among the victims. She ordered the seizure of all Whitmore family assets, including the estate, the vehicles, the offshore accounts, everything. The Whitmore family fortune, built over 4 generations, was dismantled in a single afternoon. Richard showed no emotion as the sentence was read. He stood there in his expensive suit, his hands cuffed behind his back, his face blank. But I saw something flicker in his eyes when the judge said 47 years. Fear. For the first time in his privileged, consequence-free life, Richard Whitmore was experiencing real accountability. As the marshals led him away, Richard turned to look at Emma one last time. I don't know what he expected to see. Tears, perhaps, or regret, or some sign that she still had feelings for the man she had married. But Emma's face was stone. She held Lily a little tighter and watched her abuser disappear through the courtroom doors, and I could see the relief wash over her like a wave. The Whitmore family fortune, $800 million in total, was seized and distributed to the victims. Each of the 6 mothers who testified received substantial settlements. Emma received full custody of Lily and began the process of adopting her legally. The 3 babies we had rescued from the estate were returned to their biological mothers, whose identities Marcus had tracked down through the Whitmore database. And most importantly, Sophia was located in Dubai. The family who had purchased Sophia were horrified when they learned the truth. They were a wealthy couple in their 50s who had struggled with infertility for years. They had gone through the Whitmore agency believing it was a legitimate international adoption service. They had paid $300,000 for Sophia, believing the money was going toward legal fees and supporting the birth mother. When FBI agents arrived at their home in Dubai with DNA evidence proving Sophia was trafficked, they surrendered her immediately and cooperated fully with the investigation. The reunion between Emma and Sophia happened at the airport, with news cameras rolling and hundreds of people watching. Emma held her biological daughter for the first time in 3 years, and both of them cried. Sophia was 3 years old by then, old enough to be confused by the strange woman holding her and crying. But Emma was patient. She spent hours every day bonding with Sophia, reading to her, playing with her, helping her understand that she was loved and safe and home. Lily, remarkably, welcomed Sophia without jealousy. Perhaps because she was so young, or perhaps because she had been raised by Emma with so much love despite the circumstances of how they came together, Lily seemed to understand that Sophia was family. The 2 girls became inseparable within weeks, sisters in every way that mattered. But our victory wasn't complete. 2 weeks after Richard's sentencing, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a photograph of Lily at a playground near Emma's new apartment, clearly taken without our knowledge. The angle of the shot suggested it had been taken from a car with a telephoto lens. Lily was on a swing, Emma was pushing her, and both of them were smiling. It should have been an innocent moment, but the surveillance nature of the photograph made it sinister. There was a note inside the package, typed on expensive stationery with no fingerprints. It said, "The Whitmore family remembers. Justice is temporary. Revenge is forever. Victor." Richard's uncle Victor was still out there. He was the one who had run the international side of the operation, coordinating with traffickers in 6 countries, arranging the sales of babies to wealthy clients in Europe and the Middle East. He lived in Geneva, Switzerland, in a penthouse apartment overlooking Lake Geneva. He had never been arrested because Swiss authorities claimed they didn't have sufficient evidence to charge him, and the United States couldn't extradite him without Swiss cooperation. But Victor had made a mistake. He had threatened my family, and I had spent 30 years of my career taking down people who thought they were untouchable. I could have been afraid. I could have put Emma and the girls into witness protection, moved them somewhere remote, lived the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders. David certainly suggested it. Marcus offered to set up a security system that would make Fort Knox look like a summer cottage. Father Tom offered sanctuary at his church. But I didn't want to hide. I had spent 3 years not knowing where my daughter was, believing I had lost her forever. Now that I had her back, now that she was building a new life with her daughters, I wasn't going to let some entitled criminal in Switzerland steal that from us. So I went to Geneva. I told Victor the first wanted to interview him for a follow-up article, to get the Whitmore family's perspective on what had happened. I framed it as an opportunity for him to defend his nephew, to explain how the family had been wronged by a vindictive journalist and a delusional daughter-in-law. Victor's ego was bigger than his caution, and he agreed to meet with me. What Victor didn't know was that I wasn't working alone. Marcus had spent weeks building a case file on Victor and sharing it with Interpol agents who weren't on the Whitmore payroll. Jade had coordinated with international journalists to ensure the story would break simultaneously in multiple countries. David had worked with Swiss attorneys to understand the specific laws that would allow Victor to be prosecuted in Switzerland even if he couldn't be extradited to the United States. And I was wearing a wire. We met at an expensive hotel in Geneva, in a private dining room overlooking the lake. Victor was in his 60s, impeccably dressed in a silk suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. He had the same cold eyes as Richard, the same sense of absolute entitlement, the same conviction that money made him invincible. For the first hour, Victor was careful. He talked about the adoption industry, about helping families, about how the system was broken and his family had simply found ways to navigate it. He admitted nothing illegal. He expressed sympathy for Emma's mental health struggles. He suggested that Richard had been wrongly convicted by a biased jury swayed by emotional testimony rather than facts. But I knew how to interview criminals. I had been doing it for 3 decades. I knew how to make them comfortable, how to make them want to prove how clever they were, how to get them to reveal just a little bit more than they intended. I showed him a document that Marcus had created, a fake client list that looked real but was actually bait. It included the names of several of Victor's actual clients mixed with fictional ones. I told him we had found it in Richard's safe, and I asked if he could verify its authenticity. Victor examined the list carefully. I watched his body language shift as he recognized some of the names. And then he made his fatal mistake. He relaxed, assuming the document was a forgery that couldn't hurt him, and he said, "This is useless to you. Richard must have made it to protect himself in case he got caught. It's not even complete. It's missing our premium clients." Premium clients. He had just admitted knowledge of clients, which meant knowledge of the trafficking operation. I pressed further, keeping my voice casual, curious rather than accusatory. "What makes a client premium?" Victor, confident now, comfortable, enjoying the chance to demonstrate his expertise, explained. "Clients who pay extra for specific features. Hair color, eye color, genetic profiles. We pioneered some very sophisticated techniques. We could identify pregnant women carrying children with desired characteristics, monitor the genetics, arrange the delivery. If a client wanted blonde twins, we would find a woman pregnant with blonde twins and acquire them. It required extensive planning and substantial investment, but the returns were remarkable. We could command prices of up to $1 million for premium orders." He had just confessed to human trafficking on camera, describing the operation in detail, admitting to deliberately targeting specific children, explaining the financial model. Everything he said was being recorded by the wire I wore and transmitted to Interpol agents waiting in an adjacent room. I asked one more question, giving him every opportunity to clarify or backtrack. "And you were involved in these premium arrangements personally?" Victor smiled, proud of his work. "I coordinated the entire international operation. Richard handled domestic clients, but I managed Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. We had networks in 12 countries. It was quite an empire. Really, before your daughter's mental breakdown destroyed everything. That was enough." Swiss police and Interpol agents entered the room before Victor could realize what had happened. He tried to backtrack, claimed entrapment, insisted that Switzerland didn't extradite to the United States. One of the officers, a woman who spoke perfect English, explained that human trafficking was a crime under Swiss law, that Victor had just confessed to coordinating trafficking across international borders, and that he would be prosecuted in Switzerland where the penalties were severe. Victor looked at me with pure hatred. "You set me up. This is entrapment. No court will accept this evidence." I smiled. "Actually, Victor, in Switzerland, recorded confessions obtained through legal means are perfectly admissible. I'm a journalist conducting an interview. You chose to confess to crimes on camera. That's not entrapment. That's just stupidity." Victor was arrested, charged with 17 counts of human trafficking under Swiss law, conspiracy to traffic minors across international borders, money laundering, and fraud. The trial in Switzerland was faster than Richard's had been in the United States. Swiss courts don't use juries for complex criminal cases, instead relying on panels of judges. The evidence was presented over 3 weeks. Victor's confession was played in court, his own words describing the trafficking operation in detail. Marcus's evidence showed the financial trail, millions of dollars moving through Swiss banks. Interpol presented testimony from victims in 6 countries. Victor was sentenced to 30 years in a Swiss prison. Unlike American prisons, Swiss facilities are known for being relatively comfortable, but 30 years is still 30 years. Victor would be 92 years old if he survived his full sentence. His assets, which he had believed were protected by Swiss banking privacy laws, were seized. Turns out, even Switzerland draws the line at protecting money earned from trafficking children. The international trafficking network was dismantled over the following months. Interpol, working with law enforcement in 15 countries, arrested 67 co-conspirators. They ranged from corrupt hospital administrators who falsified birth records, to lawyers who forged adoption documents, to fixers who identified vulnerable pregnant women and coerced them into giving up their babies. 214 children were located through the Whitmore database, some as young as infants, some as old as teenagers. Where possible, they were reunited with their biological families. In cases where reunification wasn't feasible, they were placed with families who had not been involved in trafficking and who were committed to helping them heal. Emma's Law was passed 6 months after Victor's conviction. It created federal oversight for all adoption agencies, required background checks for anyone involved in facilitating adoptions, mandated DNA testing to verify biological relationships, and established a database to track children across state and international lines. The law had bipartisan support because no politician wanted to be seen as opposing efforts to stop child trafficking. In its first year, Emma's Law resulted in 347 arrests and 892 children recovered from trafficking situations. I received my second Pulitzer Prize for the Whitmore investigation and the resulting series of articles about human trafficking in the adoption industry. The award ceremony was bittersweet. I stood on stage accepting the prize, knowing that my journalism had made a difference, had literally saved children's lives. But I also knew that there were still traffickers out there, still vulnerable families being exploited, still work to be done. That was 6 months ago. Today, I'm sitting in Emma's apartment, a sunny 2-bedroom in a safe neighborhood with good schools and a playground visible from the kitchen window. I'm watching my daughter cook dinner, something simple and ordinary like spaghetti with marinara sauce and garlic bread. Sophia and Lily are playing on the living room floor, building an elaborate tower out of blocks that will inevitably fall and make them both laugh. Emma has gained back the weight she lost during her years with Richard and her months on the streets. She looks healthy now, vibrant even. She completed 18 months of intensive trauma therapy, working through the abuse, the captivity, the loss of Sophia, and the survival. She still has nightmares sometimes, but they're getting less frequent. She's writing a book about her experience, not because she needs the money from the book deal, but because she wants other survivors to know they're not alone. She started the Emma Foundation 6 months ago, a nonprofit that provides support services for trafficking survivors and their families. She works with therapists, lawyers, and social workers to help women rebuild their lives after escaping trafficking situations. She has become an advocate, testifying before Congress, speaking at conferences, using her story to change laws and change minds. Sophia is 3.5 years old now, healthy and happy, with Emma's eyes and smile. She doesn't remember her time in Dubai with the family who purchased her. She knows the story in age-appropriate terms, that she lived with a different family for a while, but now she's with her real mommy where she belongs. She starts preschool next month, and Emma is both excited and terrified. Lily is 3 now, her cleft palate surgically repaired when she was 2.5. The surgery was successful, and the only reminder of her birth defect is a small scar on her upper lip that will fade as she grows. She's thriving in ways that Richard never thought possible, proving that his clinical assessment of her value was as wrong as everything else about him. She calls Emma Mama, and she calls me Grandma Maggie, and she has no memory of the man who called her defective and planned to dispose of her. The 2 girls are sisters in every way that matters. They fight sometimes the way sisters do, arguing over toys or attention. But they also protect each other, comfort each other, share everything. Sophia is the cautious one, thinking before she acts, while Lily is the adventurous one, jumping first and asking questions later. Together, they're perfect. David visits every Sunday with his own children, my other grandchildren. We have family dinners now, all of us together around Emma's kitchen table or mine, eating too much food and telling stories and laughing. We're rebuilding what Richard tried to destroy. We're creating new memories to replace the painful ones. We're healing slowly but surely. Emma sets the pot of spaghetti on the table and calls the girls to wash their hands for dinner. They run to the bathroom, giggling about something only they understand. Emma sits down next to me and takes my hand. Mom, I never properly thanked you. For what? For not giving up on me. For finding me. for believing me when I told you about Richard, for destroying the people who tried to destroy us. I squeeze her hand. You're my daughter. I would burn the world down to save you. She smiles, and there are tears in her eyes, but they're good tears. You kind of did. The girls return from the bathroom, their hands dripping wet because they never dry them properly, no matter how many times Emma reminds them. Sophia climbs into her chair and immediately starts organizing her plate, placing her napkin just so, arranging her fork and spoon precisely. Lily climbs into her chair and reaches for the garlic bread before Emma can even serve the pasta. Lily, wait for everyone please, Emma says gently. Lily sighs dramatically but pulls her hand back. But I'm starving, Mama. You'll survive another 2 minutes, Emma says with a smile. As we serve the food and start eating, Sophia looks at me with her serious little face. Grandma, tell us the story of how you found Mommy. Again? I've told you 100 times. Lily bounces in her chair. Please, it's the best story. Emma catches my eye and nods, giving me permission to tell it again. So I take a breath and begin, simplifying the details for young ears, focusing on the love and the courage rather than the darkness. It all started with a red light on a Tuesday evening in October. I was driving downtown when traffic stopped, and I looked to my right and saw a woman sitting on the sidewalk. And something about that woman made me look closer, and I realized it was your mommy. And I knew I had to help her, no matter what it took. The girls listen with wide eyes, even though they've heard this story many times before. They know how it ends, with their family together and safe, but they never get tired of hearing about it. Maybe because it's a story about love conquering evil. Maybe because it's their story, the story of how their family was born from ashes and built into something beautiful. As I tell the story, Emma holds my hand under the table. Outside, the sun is setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange. Inside, we're warm and safe and together, eating spaghetti and garlic bread, being a family. Richard Whitmore is in a federal prison in Pennsylvania, serving year 7 of his 47-year sentence. He'll be 75 years old if he lives to see release. Victor Whitmore is in a Swiss prison, serving year 1 of his 30-year sentence. The Whitmore family name, once synonymous with wealth and prestige, is now synonymous with evil and exploitation. And we are here. We are alive. We are free. We are whole. The story I told Sophia and Lily is simplified, sanitized for young ears. But the real story, the one I'll tell them when they're older, is about more than just finding Emma on that sidewalk. It's about refusing to accept injustice. It's about using every resource, every skill, every connection to fight for what's right. It's about recognizing that sometimes the system fails, and when it does, you have to create your own justice. We did something impossible. We took on one of the most powerful families in the country, exposed their crimes, destroyed their empire, and rescued dozens of children in the process. We couldn't have done it alone. It took Marcus and his hacking skills. It took Yolanda and her knowledge of the system. It took Father Tom and his moral guidance. It took Jade and her journalism platform. It took David and his legal expertise. It took Sarah and her courage to testify. But most of all, it took a mother who refused to give up on her daughter, and a daughter who refused to stay broken. 3 years ago, I thought I had lost Emma forever. I thought she had chosen her new wealthy life over our family. I blamed myself for not trying harder to maintain contact, for not seeing the signs, for not rescuing her sooner. 6 months into her homelessness, I found her on that sidewalk, broken, terrified, traumatized, but alive. And in that moment, when I recognized my daughter sitting on cold concrete with a child in her arms and bruises on her skin, I made a choice. I chose to fight. I chose to believe her. I chose to dedicate every resource I had to destroying the people who had hurt her. Today, she's cooking dinner in her own apartment, raising her daughters, building a career helping other survivors. She smiles now, genuinely smiles, in a way she hasn't since before she met Richard. She has nightmares still, but she also has dreams again. She has hope. She has a future. And that is the greatest victory of all. Not the Pulitzer Prize, though I'm proud of that. Not the arrests or the convictions or the dismantled trafficking network, though those matter immensely. Not even the legislative changes, though Emma's law will save countless children in the years to come. The greatest victory is sitting at this dinner table, watching my daughter be a mother, watching my granddaughters be children, knowing that we survived. We fought back. We won. Sometimes justice comes from courts and laws and official channels. But sometimes, justice comes from a mother who loves her daughter enough to burn down the world to save her. And from a daughter who loves her children enough to run into the unknown with nothing but hope and determination. We are proof that evil doesn't always win. We are proof that love is stronger than cruelty. We are proof that families can be broken and rebuilt into something even more beautiful than before. This is our story. This is how we survived. This is how we won. And this is how we live now, together, free, whole, and home.